Welcome to the program, Jared. I guess, am I on your program or are you on my program? Okay. So Jared and we talk on the phone occasionally, and today we're going to talk about, let's see, uh, narcissistic personality disorder and how that might be something spiritual and not necessarily physiological, right, Jared? One of several types of personality disorders is a mental condition in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, troubled relationships, and a lack of empathy for others. I also looked up psychopathy. You notice how it says a lack of empathy for others. I read that part. Um, there's psychopathy is a neuropsychiatric disorder marked by deficient emotional responses, lack of empathy, and poor behavioral controls, commonly resulting in persistent antisocial deviance and criminal behavior. So they're kind of related.
Yeah, they with the what's it called? I think it's called the DSM. That's like the manual or the whatever you want to call it that we use here in the United States to diagnose mental disorders and personality disorders. You These type of personality disorders are they're under what's called cluster B. So it's kind of like a family of related disorders. And typically you can think of it like whenever you hear like the term a toxic personality or a toxic person, a lot of times it's talking about someone that's kind of like further down on the spectrum of one of these personality disorders. You have psychopathy, which it's officially known as antisocial personality disorder. You have narcissistic personality disorder. You have histrionic. You have borderline.
Sociopathy.
Sociopathy. Usually that and psychopathy are kind of clumped together under antisocial personality disorder, but there are some that make that distinguish between the two because they have different characteristics.
Well, let me ask you something. Isn't sociopaths, they don't lack empathy. They actually have empathy, right? Sociopaths and psychopaths, what are the differences between the two?
My rough understanding is that psychopaths are more calculated or more they don't have as much, or psychopaths have more impulse control, and whereas a sociopath, from the sense that I get, the research that I've done, a sociopath is more of just kind of like a hot mess, right? So psychopaths can like rise up in society and not really be detected because a lot of times they'll kind of like fit in except for the things that you don't see, whereas a sociopath is probably a little bit more obvious. But that's just the sense that I get. I'm more interested. I think we're probably going to be talking about this together. I'm more interested in like the spiritual aspect of it because
right, exactly. Sorry, did I interrupt? I got to stop saying that. Did I interrupt? One thing I found, and I'm going to read something. I did a little bit of research on the spiritual aspects of this as well as the physiological aspects. But I noticed that narcissistic personality disorder, or what we call narcissistic, right? Or narcissists.
Narcissism. Yeah.
Narcissism and psychopathy, they both have one thing in common, and it's lack empathy for others. And I didn't mention we were talking about sociopaths because that's a little different. But Satan and the third, I believe, lack empathy. The third of the hosts of heaven. and Satan. What made Satan's proposal so deviant and rebellious and self-aggrandizing was not that he desired to save all of God's children. Indeed, we can rest assured that the exaltation of God's children was as far from his heart as any other charitable motive. The scriptures make it clear that Satan sinned and that he alone desired all the glory for any success in bringing to pass what the Father had already set out to accomplish. The salvation and exaltation of all of his children. And surely I will do it, Satan said. Wherefore give me thine honor. Moses chapter 4, verse 1. Satan's proposal was more than just self-centered and egotistical. In reality, his proposal constituted an outright rebellion against God and his kingdom. President Ezra Taft Benson taught that in the pre-earthly council, Lucifer placed his proposal in competition with the Father's plan as advocated by Jesus Christ. He wished to be honored above all others. In short, his prideful desire was to dethrone God. Now, that to me sounds like a narcissistic personality disorder, right?
Yeah. So, for everyone watching, obviously we're not psychologists, but so when we're talking about these personality disorders, like we're not like coming at it from a clinical standpoint, right? Because when you give a diagnosis, you're doing it because you're like officially identifying something that needs to be cured or worked on or treated by a professional, right? So, but this study that psychology has undertaken into these dark personality disorders, it's still useful, and I really do think it's more of a spiritual thing than it is a mental thing. And there's a lot to talk about that, but Satan, this is what I would say. I would say that he's probably the epitome of what a narcissistic psychopath is, because one of the traits of narcissism is they look for power and they look for control, right? And that's something that he sought after. But you'll also notice that anytime that Satan usually shows up in person in the scriptures, he's demanding worship. And in the world of psychology, what they call that is narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply is getting praise from other people, getting validation, getting attention, gaining influence, just basically getting, for lack of a better term, other people's energy, essentially.
Right.
They're kind of like energy vampires.
Right.
They want
I've
you.
heard that term before.
What was that?
I've heard that term before.
Yeah.
Energy vampire, yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of true. Okay, so the thing is that they're not really able to regulate their own feelings of self-worth. They outsource that to other people. So, if you're a narcissist, you look in the mirror and you're like, well, I think I might be attractive, but they can't just like say that to themselves. They come to you and like, am I attractive? And they want you to validate this kind of construct that they make up in their mind.
I've seen dictators do that, like in some of the footage they've shown. I remember Saddam Hussein, there's a clip of him taking out some of his minions or his rival. It was right when he got into power. And he everyone was so afraid in the audience, all these generals and these soldiers and whatnot, and they were so scared that they were chanting his name and aggrandizing him. He literally started crying, like he was so wrapped up in himself, and it was so. Probably this like rush that he received from these people basically worshiping him, because he was going to kill whoever got into his way, and he did. There's a video of this, you can watch it, of when Saddam Hussein got into power, and he takes out about 4 or 5 men, he points them out, and they take them in the back and shoot them. And then everybody's crying like, Saddam, Saddam, and he's literally bawling. But it's not for them. It's for himself. It's crazy.
Narcissism is a very, very, very serious issue. And I think there's a lot of spiritual implications. And we actually learn about those in the scriptures simply by observing Satan, observing wicked men, and what they try and do. It's in the scriptures. You don't think of it in this like psychological term, but it is there, and that's essentially what it is. All of them are little Saddam Hussein's and Hitler's. Like, I've always said that these people, these dictators, there's nothing special about them. They were just in the right place at the right time. You know, there are
Right.
Saddam Hussein's and Hitler's walking among us, and they're also in the church. They're different places. It's just they weren't born into those circumstances. And when you have like a religious community, like you have the Jews at the time of when Christ came, you typically get Pharisees. These are people that there's nothing on the inside, but they're trying to, they see everything in a very hierarchical way, and they're supposed to be at the top, whatever it is that they're trying to do. So if you're born into a society and it all revolves around Judaism, the way that you rise to the top and the way that you gain attention, power, control, praise, is, maybe you become a rabbi, or you become a doctor of the law, and then people start to listen to you, and you're harvesting that narcissistic supply from those around you. And so you can understand why Christ was so upset, because these people are like pretending like they're obeying the commandments or they're doing what God wants, but they're not. Their heart is not there at all. They don't have a heart. They're playing a social game. They're playing a power game with the church.
Right. Yeah. One thing that I think of is these neurosurgeons and brain surgeons and heart surgeons that have had people have near-death experiences, and how much, like, some of these men have been atheists, and then they hear these stories about these near-death experiences, and they change their views on how the brain works. Like that maybe, well, for instance, let me give you an example. Oh, shoot. Let me see if I can find it. Well, okay. Like, there's some esoteric theories and differences between the spirit and the brain. So what I mean by esoteric is, you know what that means, right? Most commonly means obscure, only understood and intended by a small number of people. Like,
and it's like specialized knowledge in a field that's like very detailed and like, yeah, right.
So here are some excerpts from various doctors, scientists, and theologians. To the best of my understanding, the spirit, I call it, is the solar consciousness. The brain, the human consciousness, are two totally independent entities. When the solar consciousness is not melded with a human body, it is super intelligent. A portion of this energy is downloaded by the human consciousness. Most of our activity as humans is controlled by the human consciousness, along with all of its flaws and limitations. Both consciousnesses are running in parallel with each other, but the human consciousness prevails as long as the spirit or the solar conscious is incarnated. Now, I know that's kind of way out there, but I find it interesting, that other people believe that the brain, we can go back in history and look at some of the belief systems of others when it came to the brain and the spirit. Another one is this Carl Grove. He has a PhD in psychology and traditional Eastern psychology, and the view of traditional esoteric teachers is that we comprise two distinct selves. One, the spirit, is the true self. The other, the false self, or carnal, made up of conditional beliefs and primitive motivations, clearly reflects the activities of the brain. For most of us, most of the time, the false self is in charge. When the body dies, so does the false self, of course. Teachers try to help their pupils learn how to control and inhibit the activities of the false self. You know what? I think I'm reading the wrong thing.
Well, it's going
I
along
might,
with.
I might edit that part out. I don't know. But go ahead.
Well, it's applicable because look, all right. So yeah, what you're talking about, this is because when I was in college, I took a philosophy class as a elective, and this is the classic body-mind problem. And when I say mind, I don't mean brain. I mean whatever your intelligence is. And how is it that the mind and the body interface, right? And I think a lot of people believe that it's probably through the brain. Like the brain is some kind of almost like controller, for the spirit to interface with the physical world. But what you're talking about right now with the false self, and the two consciousness running parallel to each other,
Right.
Our body, it's the natural man, right? And it is a false self. If your spirit does not act, then you're handing over all the control to this dead thing that I believe is, your brain without any input from your spirit. And it's a false self. And in narcissism, the idea is that a child comes into this life and then they come across some kind of abuse or trauma. And so what happens is the child, the true self, withdraws from the world. They're like, okay, this is too much. I'm not going to deal with this. And instead, they hand it over to a false self. They come up with a facade. They basically imagine like a superhero and an indestructible, all-powerful version of themselves to cope with the traumas of life. And if they stick with that defense strategy, a narcissist is born. It's somebody that has withdrawn from reality. They have a false self, a fantasy, and they have to get other people to buy into the fantasy. And from our church's perspective, the way that I think of it is simply, we come here from a premortal life. Some of us are able to handle life and we don't lose ourselves. We face it, and but others don't. They come here and then they cower and they hand everything over to this false self, to the natural man. And so instead of acting, instead of being something that acts, they are something that is acted upon, which is confusing because the way that narcissists act, you feel like they're really in control, but they're not. They're subject to causality, cause and effect. Once you learn narcissism, you understand their playbook, and they're very, 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 very predictable.
Like gaslighting?
That's because I think there's very little spiritual input going on with these people.
Right. Like what they call gaslighting?
Gaslighting is one of their tactics. It's a way that it's a tool that they use to maintain control. If something's going against their fantasy, they have to change your reality, right? Like they'll be like, no, I never said that. Or, oh, you're crazy. It's a manipulative technique to
Right.
get somebody back in line with where you need them. And where you need them as a narcissist is, hey, you need to be useful to me, and you need to be giving me your attention, your praise, your validation, etc.
We know that, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me that we know through the gospel of Jesus Christ that we developed as human beings before we came to earth. And to think that well, especially as Latter-day Saints, it would be preposterous for us to believe that everything happens up here in the brain. Because a third of the hosts of heaven and Satan himself kind of fall under that same category that we're talking about. And I like in 1991, at the age of 35, there was an American songwriter. Her name was Pam Reynolds Lowry. And she stated that she had a near-death experience during a brain operation performed by Robert F. Fetzer at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, Arizona. Reynolds was under close medical monitoring during the entire operation. During part of the operation, she had no brainwave activity and no blood flowing in her brain, which rendered her clinically dead. She claimed to have made several observations during the procedure, which later medical personnel reported to be accurate. I like those stories because what it does is it says that not everything happens in our brain.
And I've been interested in that topic as well quite a bit. Now, we always have to take some of it with a grain of salt. And ironically,
Right.
It's because you have narcissists that look at near-death experiences and they say, oh, this is a great way to be special and to get attention. And I when you listen to the different stories, sometimes I feel like you can tell that it's not real, or they're just making it up. Other
Right.
ones, I feel like you can tell that they are real. And I don't know if I think it was April conference this year that like Down H. Oaks was talking about just being careful with that stuff, with very, very spiritual experiences like that. Not denying that they happen,
Right.
but just we have to use our good judgment, I guess, simply because there are those that view it as a way to harvest narcissistic supply. There's no way that you can verify that they didn't have that experience, and so for a narcissist, it's a good way to get that. And and they'll kind of follow the themes of like, oh, I saw a family member, I had a life review, I had to make a choice if I was going to come back or if I was going to stay. So like they watch, these stories and they know what they need to say to fit in, right? But they have their own agenda. So people that don't really think that much, or they're a little bit too believing, they could get deceived by some of these some of the false, near-death experiences. But I
Right.
definitely think that there are true ones, and you have ones kind of like that where they're able to prove that they really were conscious out of the body, because there's no way they didn't have any sensory input. It would be impossible for them to recount what they saw and heard while they were on the operating table. And there
Right.
have been documented cases like that, and it's very, very intriguing.
Well, and I think the point that I'm making here is the ones that are true, and I've seen some of them myself, but I know exactly what you're talking about. There are those who make it up, and you could tell that they're making it up. But the ones that are real, the point I'm making is that there can be spirits that psychopathy and narcissistic behavior aren't necessarily something that happened at birth, or aren't necessarily something that is physiological. that it is spiritual. And I know that not all psychopaths are criminals. Some don't even know that they meet the definition of the condition, but a lot of them do. Like, can we know? That's the question. Can we know if we, like, are there psychopaths that go, hey, I am a bona fide psychopath, and they live a regular life, or are they usually in denial of that?
I think it's more likely going to be the narcissists that are in denial. Okay, so there's kind of two parts to that. So with psychopathy and sociopathy, yeah, you can be aware of it, but they don't care. There's a YouTube video. I can't remember the guy's name, but he's a professor somewhere, and he studies he studies this stuff, and they were doing like some kind of study on the brains of psychopaths, because unlike narcissism.
Was this in the Smithsonian Magazine?
What was that?
Was this James Fallon?
I don't know.
I've got the story right here.
It's that story where they were doing the brain scans, and then they brought him one, and he was like, well, this can't be right. This is...
Yes, exactly. He was 60 years old.
What was that?
He was 60 years old. And they brought it to him. He was researching his, like, murderers in his family or something like that. And they brought him a scan, and he's like, yeah, this is a psychopath. And they're like, well, this is your brain scan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, psychopaths, I think that they can know, and they just don't care. But whereas with narcissists, so narcissists are fighting a lifelong battle with themselves, okay? Because you essentially have kind of like three people in a sense. You have the true self, which is retreated from life, retreated from reality, and it's the part that's supposed to be protected by the second part, which is the false self. The false self's job is to protect the inner child and be this all-powerful being. But then there's a third self, and I would argue that it's nothing more than that person's conscience. Sometimes they call it the seditious self-critic, that will tell the true self, hey, you're a bad person, and what you did was bad. And it's like a constant critic. So there's this like struggle between the false self and the inner critic, which again, I think is just simply the person's conscience, right? So a narcissist, yeah, I think they can become self-aware, but then if they do, they're kind of like giving in to the critic and acknowledging that the critic is right. Because that's essentially what the critic is saying is, hey, you're a really selfish person, and
Right.
you don't care about other people. You don't have empathy. So now there is a leader, like one of the leaders in this field of narcissism. His name is Sam Vaknin, and he himself is a diagnosed, he has his diagnosis as narcissistic personality disorder. And that only came to him after hitting rock bottom in his life. I think he said like 3 times. He went to jail one time, and then another time, I don't know if he got divorced, but he hit rock bottom, went and saw a counselor, and all 3 times that got the same, diagnosis, and then he finally admitted it. So for a narcissist to be self-aware, I think it's kind of a rare thing for them to accept it officially, but I think every single one of them on the inside really do know what they are, and they're trying to ignore it.
I think because of Hollywood, we tend to think of the psychopath as, like Jason or or those mass murderers, like with. But that's not true. Um,
Most
Not
most
necessarily, no.
most psychopaths aren't like that, and you can live around them. And but can they change? Can they change their life? Can they become better people? Is there redemption for the psychopath?
I
You
think
know,
there is more so for the psychopath and sociopath than there is for the narcissist. That's just based on studies that have been done. You can check out Sam Vaknin. He talks about that, how there are a lot of psychopaths that in their later years, like say after like 50 years old, it actually starts to kind of recede their psychopathy. But that's not the case with someone that has malignant narcissism. It seems like, okay, so narcissism is kind of like a spectrum, right? And it
right,
seems like, based on everything that I've studied, you kind of get to this point where you're so far down, it's kind of like a point of no return. Or if you do return, it's like a miracle. Now, the scriptures tell us that, that's not true, that you can change. And I believe that you can. I just think that for people that go past that point, just they normally don't. But I think that they can. I absolutely think that they can.
yeah.
It's just hard because they've lived that evil life strategy for so long that they just they don't really know anything else. But I think that they can.
otherwise that would do away with agency. Um, I read. I hope I don't sound like I'm just reading stuff. Um, I'm going to edit this too. Are you off the record? Are you doing okay with this subject so far? Okay. You look tired.
I am tired.
I'm
I
sorry.
took some medication and it makes me a bit drowsy. So, but I had to take it. So hopefully I'm not looking too.
So this says psychopaths can be surprisingly hard to spot. Um, you stay secretly angry for years. I don't know what that means. You're good at externalizing blame in clever ways. Here's one, and this is right up Satan's alley, right? Or this is exactly out of his play. You have ethics, but no morals. And that's kind of what you've been talking about.
Yeah, look, I would say that both of them, they're basically, what you're looking at is like you're looking at a husk of a human being. You're looking at a robot. You're looking at somebody that they don't find value in principles, right? They live the law of the jungle. So narcissist, it's all about survival of the fittest. And say that you're a narcissist at a church. Well, what you got to do is you got to rise to the top and get the highest calling or the highest position. If you're at work, well, you have to rise up and get that control, get the better position. So they live in this celestial world, this fallen world where it's all about eat or be eaten. And, it goes along with that whole idea of the natural man. They're not really acting. They're being acted upon according to the laws of this fallen world, right? Whereas
Right.
someone who's living the gospel, using faith, you rise up above that chain of causality, right? Like there's someone over there that's better than me, which causes me to want to be better than them if I'm living that lower law. But
Right.
if you have faith, you go against what makes sense in the natural world. Because if you see someone else that's better than you, the natural tendency is to try and downplay that person or compete against them in some way, possibly even kill them. That's what makes sense to the natural man. But in the gospel, we don't do that. It doesn't make sense to the natural man. And so I think that that's where faith comes in. We use faith to rise above the material world and stop being a thing that's acted upon. And then we start acting, because it requires us to act, to not go after that guy and not compete with them or try and bring them down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, the opposite. That's what Christ taught. Christ taught everything opposite of what the narcissist and the psychopath believe in, or what they represent. When we see somebody that's doing good, the narcissist he envies them. He wants to tear them down or do better than them. What can I do to get gain over my brother? Cain might have been the first psychopath. He was. And so Christ teaches us to love your brother, do good to those who spitefully use you. Lift your brother up, and that's the opposite of getting over. So it's not anything new. I think the difference between what the atheists and the secularists believe is that it happens at birth, or it's a disorder. But I'm on the same page with you that I don't believe it is a disorder. I believe that it's something spiritual.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Now, the strongest argument that they have is that brain argument when you look at the scans of a psychopath's brain. But that's not really proof that it's not spiritual, because for all you know, the reason why they have those dark spots in their brains with little activity, maybe it's because that spirit simply isn't pushing those buttons. They're choosing not to exercise that part of their brain, rather than it being an inability or like something's wrong with the brain. They may just not be pushing those buttons because that's what they've chosen to be in this life.
Right.
I know there's going to be people that are probably upset at this video, like talking like this, and I'm not saying that that's absolutely necessarily the case, but when you study these so-called personality disorders, it fits in exactly with what evil is. The root of evil, Paul says that it's money, but the root of evil is self, like trying to elevate self above others rather than serving others and putting others first. That's what all sin comes down to. It's self, whether you're focused on yourself or whether you're focused on others. That's right. What it all comes down to.
That's right.
I think there are going to be too many offended. I think most people understand what psychopathy is, and that it's not something that. Go ahead.
Look, this is a very, very tricky subject, because although normal people probably would take it well, narcissists do not. They do not. It ruffles feathers. If you believe that there's a narcissist in your family or a friend, you should not call them out or start arguing these points. It's going to end badly for you. And I've done that myself. Believe me, you do not want to go down that road, because once you expose them, it's literally like life threatening to them, because their whole life is it's all about the false self, and once you take the false self away, they have nothing. They feel completely exposed. They'll get angry at you. They'll start organizing smear campaigns against you, because now they have this problem. The problem is you, and they got to do something about it, because it may seem silly to you, but for them, image is everything. They have to keep up the lie. They have to keep up the fantasy. And if you can see past that, if you can see the man behind the curtain, I mean, that's like a perfect example right there. Basically, a narcissist is that big head in the Wizard of Oz. They want people to be scared of them. They want people to respect them. They want people to worship them, whatever. But if you realize that all it is a man behind a curtain, that's a real problem for them. So I would not recommend saying, hey, you know what? I think you're a narcissist, or I think you're a psychopath.
Right.
No. Study it. And there's things that you can do to help yourself, which is mostly just leave them alone. And if you can, try and separate yourself from them, because they're toxic, and they're toxic on your system. They cause stress. They try and brainwash people. They try and get you to believe things that are not true. They're not good for you.
Right.
So you just leave them alone and slowly kind of walk away.
Observe them from a distance. That's about it.
And try and surround yourself with other genuine people and good people. That's the best thing that you can do. Don't go for revenge. Don't think that you're going to make them feel bad by exposing them. You just simply work on yourself.
All right.
Yeah.
That's awesome,
Jared. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I don't know. I was just going to, I don't know. One thing about it, okay, is if this is resonating with any of you out there, study it, okay? It will benefit you. You will basically have a new pair of eyes, and your world will never be the same again, I assure you, okay? Because the thing you have to realize about psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, all cluster Bs, is that they're essentially chameleons. Okay, they even though they have an evil life strategy, they know how to fit in within society. Because if they didn't learn how to fit in, then that would be bad news for them. So they have to be crafty. They have to infiltrate, right? So if you hear somebody, say you hear somebody at church, and they're given this like just amazing testimony during fast and testimony meeting, a lot of people will be like, oh, that person is so spiritual, because like look at what they said in their testimony. Oh, look, they're doing all these charitable acts for people. Oh, they're paying for this person's mission. They do those things to get you to believe that, right? A lot of times they'll do the same things that good people do, but for completely different reasons. Again, look at the Pharisees. They were living the commandments, but they were doing it for a completely wrong reason, And if you observe somebody long enough, their mask will start to slip. Okay, that's what it takes. It takes long observation to see what they do and see when they slip up. And and a lot of times it comes to your gut first, or your subconscious. You'll kind of like sense that something's not right. You'll sense that there's something kind of fake or phony. And it's usually your gut is usually right about these people. So
am I a psychopath? I'm joking. I was just making a little bit of a light joke. Am I, do you get that feeling from me? I used to wonder if I was a psychopath or a narcissist.
I promise you would not be even questioning that if you were a narcissist.
Okay,
good. You would not, because that would be too scary for you. You because they have this vision of themselves, literally that they're perfect. One of the best ways to tell that someone's a narcissist is that they will never admit any fault. You can argue with them for hours, and they will never admit that they did anything wrong. And they'll try and put it on you. Or if they do say sorry, it's usually non-apologies. Like, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. That's not an apology.
Right.
They don't apologize. They do not apologize. That's one of the best ways to tell if someone is a narcissist, is if they can admit mistakes.
You're describing sorry. You're describing a lot of people I know. Some people, and yeah, it's I've had family members like that. I won't say who they are. Um, but I love them from a distance because they and just because they get older and wiser doesn't mean they change too.
No. In fact, if
Yeah.
anything, they hone their craft and become better at what they
Yeah.
do. Um, it's just crazy. And in the scriptures, I think there's other things that you can look at that kind of touch on this subject, because a lot of times Satan is referred to as a serpent, right?
Right.
And
Right.
if you look at the difference between reptiles and mammals, for example, reptiles are cold-blooded. They're not able to produce their own body heat. They have to like go lay out in the sun or have to go somewhere where that's warm, right? They're not able to do that. But mammals are able to produce their own body heat. And in fact, they can heat up, they can warm up other animals that are with them, right? If you're like in a herd, you can warm each other up. And I think there's a spiritual similarity there because normal functioning people, they're able to sustain their own emotional and spiritual self. They don't need other people to do it for them. They have a heart, they have love, they have internal gifts to give to others, and they have their own sense of self-worth. A narcissist does not have those things. They don't. Just like a cold-blooded reptile is not able to produce its own body heat, so is the case with narcissism when it comes to feelings of self-worth, having a heart, having love and spiritual gifts and stuff like that. They don't have it. They have to go and take it from other people. And so I think there really is a reason why certain animals were chosen to be put in the scriptures, and essentially all throughout the scriptures, dragons and serpents, those are the bad guys, right? That's what symbolizes Satan and evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a reason for that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.